Hello, everyone. My name is Irene Martigil. I graduated from Louisiana State University with a PhD in anthropology last year. And even though I conduct research on many different topics, I would say that my core interest is the study of cultural heritage and particularly the protection of cultural heritage in the Maya area. So that's why I want to thank the Culture Symposium organizers for putting this together and for making it possible. Today I'm here to celebrate 130 years of legal protection of the cultural heritage of Belize. In this presentation, I will talk about, unfortunately, centuries-long heritage looting, theft, misappropriation, vandalism, and destruction that Belize has suffered. I will review the collection of heritage laws that have been enforced by Belize, and I will emphasize the importance of preserving and protecting heritage to ensure the survival of cultural diversity as well as to reify the Belizean identity and ultimately to sustain its heritage tourism, which, by the way, is the basis of the country's GDP. Nestled in the heart of Central America, Belize has often been defined as a melting pot of cultures or as a lattice work of interwoven identities that generated a vibrant cultural landscape, certainly reshaped by the vibrant history and the convergence of many different ethnic groups from the ancient Maya to the Creole, the Mestizo, the Garifuna, the East Indians, the Mennonites of German descent, the British legacy, colonial legacy, the African heritage, the many waves of Lebanese and Chinese migration. Well, all this together have created this very unique Belizean cultural heritage. So this tiny country has a lot to offer, culturally speaking. And even though in this presentation I am actually focusing on the Maya only, I wanted to make sure that I presented them as a key party of the Belizean identity, but not the only one. So they're a very important element of a huge tapestry of cultures and identities in the country. The remnants of the Maya culture, whose vast empire once ruled the region comprised by modern-day Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize, and which has been present in the country from the pre-classic about 2000 before Common Era until our days, are both tangible and intangible. From their unique language to their beautiful textiles, the traditional gastronomy, folkloric music and dance, art and craftsmanship of all kinds, and of course, the monumental, awe-inspiring architecture. There are many archaeological remains all across Belize. At least 600 settlements have been identified, from monumental sites like Caracol to humble workshop sites. But only a few of them have been scientifically and systematically investigated. That means that a big chunk of the Belizean history is still buried or underwater, waiting to be retrieved and brought back to its people and humanity as a whole. The exquisiteness and historical significance ascribed to the Maya material culture, however, has also multiplied the fiduciary value of these items in the international art and antiquities market, both the white and the black markets, also the gray market, turning them into targets of theft, archaeological ransack, and illegal export. In fact, Belize has been the epicenter for looting since the 19th century, if not before, when treasure hunters were plundering the nation's ruins, sometimes under the guise of archaeology. These colonial explorers, quote unquote, were fascinated by the beauty, the exoticism, and the mysticism that surrounded the ancient Maya worldviews and lifestyles. And it's that same fascination that triggered planned and opportunistic or occasional looting conducted both by locals and foreigners and for a wide array of reasons, sometimes for collecting purposes, for scientific purposes, or of course for monetary purposes. the market of looted archaeological assets blossomed at the beginning of the 20th century, and that is when that cycle of the fish that bite its tail began. The international market demanded masterful Maya carved stelae and painted pottery, which induced the systematic archaeological plunder of sites. And the theft and the mutilation of monuments, and that continuous supply of Maya artifacts, sometimes from Belize, kept igniting scholarship, which added value to the assets and trigger more looting, and that's how just the cycle continued over the 20th century. And to this day, looting remains a major problem in Belize, particularly because of the very specific characteristics of this country. It seems to be the ideal scenario for illicit antiquities trafficking. It doesn't really have an extensive master list of all the archaeological sites, and just the jungle terrain facilitates the undertaking of clandestine activities with near absolute impunity. This way, in the 1980s, it was reckoned that a third of the Belizean sites had been looted, including 74% of the major ceremonial sites and 53% of the minor ceremonial sites. Now, 30 years later, these numbers have increased up to 95% of all archaeological sites in Belize at some point have been plundered. Believe it or not, plundering has gotten to this stage, even though the government of Belize has laid down one of the most stringent, and actually it's one of the oldest set of cultural heritage laws in the world. Belize's long history of heritage management starts in the late 19th century. In fact, 2024 marks the 130th anniversary of the first official legal document that protected the cultural heritage of today's Belizeans. The passing of the Ancient Monuments Protection Ordinance in 1894 was ensued by a long list of laws, domestic and international, intended to safeguard the cultural and historical, movable and immovable, and tangible and intangible expressions of the country until our days. Today, Belize's strong legislation for the protection of its national heritage has become a model for other Central American countries. So in the next slides, I'm going to try to review very succinctly 130 years of active heritage protection in the country by looking at the national and international laws that are meant to safeguard the Belizean heritage. The earliest attempt to preserve Belizean archaeological sites was undertaken in 1894. The colonial government of the former British Honduras started paying attention to the preservation of its material culture and passed the Ancient Monuments Protection Ordinance. However, this instrument was quite limited in the scope of recognition, and it only protected those sites that were sitting on land owned by the government. So a little bit later, in 1924, the Ancient Monuments and Relics Ordinance was made into law to establish the first set of rules that regulated archaeological endeavors in Belize. And there were some drawbacks. For instance, the sites that were privately owned remained privately owned, and 50% of all the findings from archaeological sites became property of the site archaeologist or the sponsoring party. So this resulted in many Belizean monuments and artifacts being exported to universities and museums all over the world, but especially in Great Britain, Canada, and the United States. To remediate this, shortly after, in 1928, the Antiquities Ordinance was passed to just overall prohibit the removal of artifacts without the pre-existing authorization of Belizean government. The greatest impulse to safeguard Belize's heritage occurred from the 1970s onwards. So in 1972, we have the Ancient Monuments Antiquities Ordinance, Chapter 259, which was defined as the strongest heritage law in the world at the time, which was later followed by several archaeological reserve orders for Cerro Maya, Lamanai, and an appendix, I would call it, the Archaeological Reserves Admission Order. Then in 1998, the National Institute of Cultural and History Bill, Chapter 331, was passed, which helped fund the National Institute of Culture. And in 2017, so quite recently, the National Cultural Heritage Preservation Act was made law to help provide the NICH some of the functions and direct the funds of the heritage projects, the inventories and management plans, and others. Because of the industry of illegal antiquities trafficking involves a complex interaction of agents, usually organized in international criminal networks, collaboration among nations in form of either bilateral agreements or multilateral conventions is indispensable. Belize and the United States have closely cooperated since the U.S. was found to be the primary market for looted Maya objects, but their relationship was not really materialized until the 2013 when the Memorandum of Understanding concerning the imposition of import restrictions on categories of archaeological material of Belize was created. And this MO was aimed at prosecuting and reducing archaeological thefts by making unlawful the import of Belizean antiquities dating from pre-ceramic period to late colonial period to the United States. Similarly, Belize has also signed bilateral agreements for the protection of antiquities with Mexico in 1995 and with Guatemala in 2008. The objective of these agreements, again, is to ensure that the cultural items are not exported without a satisfactory authorization. And if that happens, the restitution then is guaranteed. In terms of multilateral cooperation, Belize became a member of UNESCO in May of 1982, and since then it has adopted both the 1972 UNESCO Convention concerning the protection of world cultural and natural heritage first, and then the 1970 UNESCO Convention on the means of prohibiting and preventing illicit export, import, and transfer of ownership of cultural property. The last one, is considered to be the most important international agreement for the protection of cultural property against theft and looting. And on top of that, Belize has, as part of the Commonwealth, joined the 1993 Commonwealth Secretariat Scheme for the Protection of the Material Cultural Heritage, which again is just reinforcing the willingness and the strong attempt at heritage preservation and protection. And the question might be, why is it worth it? Why is it worth it to preserve and protect heritage? And well, my answer is multifaceted, right? So scientifically, ancient artifacts serve as the most reliable window to the Maya culture, in this case specifically. So archaeologists can discover and reconstruct the past. Also, socially, locals can retrieve and co-create their identity through archaeology. And politically and economically, the state can build the national discourse and also boosting the domestic economy, just like Belize is doing. In fact, again, heritage preservation is essential to sustain Belize's economy at this point. In recent years, the government of Belize has been marketing and promoting tourism as its primary economic sector. In fact, tourism, or the tourism industry, has grown tremendously. So from the beach tourism in the case to cruise ships and day-long excursions to ecotourism. And it's in this last niche that archaeological tourism or cultural tourism happens. All this is partly due to the promotion of the Belizean cultural heritage in the international scenario. And this is only expected to increase in the following years as more archaeology is done and preserved in the country. And that is wonderful at so many levels. So tourism is not only a great economic driver, but it has also an outstanding educational value, and it has a significant impact in raising awareness about cultural diversity, historical multivocality, and indigenous worldviews. That said, Tourism also brings threats to cultural heritage. Mass tourism can precipitate the physical decay of cultural assets. It can induce unwanted changes in the community, like the creation of social or economic differences, and certainly can have an important environmental consequence just by the fact that littering happens, logging for land development and road construction, or soil erosion from landscape alteration. So we, just like cultural heritage people, have to be very mindful when we create and draft tourism projects to be very aware of the circumstances and have a sustainable perspective kept in mind at all times. So the Belizean Cultural Heritage Framework is not perfect by any means. However, the constant interest put in updating, expanding, and improving the legal system speaks of the commitment to strengthening the preservation efforts. And this has borne its fruits. The Belizean archaeology projects have become the epicenter of scholarly research, and its cultural assets are appreciated and valued by people from all over the world. So let's now work toward building a sustainable heritage world that respects Belize's cultural diversity, biodiversity, and identity. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.